That pose makes you look so uninterested. I love it. Welcome back to another episode of Non-Gamers React. Back by popular demand is composer, professor, person, Gregory Wanamaker. Hello, Gregory. Do I call you Gregory?
You can call me Gregory.
That's your professional name.
Well, that name gets paid a lot of money.
Today we're back. You have been gracious enough to come back, and not only a couple days. By the time this goes up, it'll be like in a month. But for us, it's a couple days, and I'm really excited because I'm going to torture you with many, many songs. There were so many requests for your beautiful brain, and I can't believe I said that. That feels really weird.
Well, no, it's a sexy brain. I got to tell you, Marco, you've got a really cool fan base, a really cool bunch of people following you, and I was really impressed with that and the feedback, and I've kept things honest. I am still a non-gamer, and I haven't listened to any video game music since we spoke, so I'm excited to see what you have planned for us today.
I'm really actually genuinely excited. I've been looking forward to this all week because there's so many things that are interesting and worth bringing up. And so to start today, we're going to take a step back in time here. We're going to go to Pictionary.
Pictionary, I'm assuming, is like the board game?
It is, yes. I have never seen footage of it, so I honestly couldn't even tell you why this piece sounds the way it does. But I think there's something about, no, I have no idea. I wouldn't even guess. I would put my foot in my ass. Or no, my foot in my mouth.
I remember back in those days when, you were a ballet dancer and you could actually do the latter, like these.
Makes you want to make use of my disco overbite. Disco overbite. Now, of course, remember that this was made at a time when it was hard because it was basically like a mixture of composing and sound and engineering, because it was all like based, So it's really interesting to me that Tim made something that's so complex and so rich, especially given the limitations of the hardware at the time. And this is like for a main menu, like a title screen that most people would skip past anyway, which is really crazy to think about too.
With title screens, I mean, how many people sit there for, in this case, 1 minute and 35 seconds and listen to the whole thing? But this actually had a structure. This wasn't, just, like a short 15-second thing that's looped over and over again. You mentioned the composer's name. I'm sorry, Tim
Follin.
Well, his name came up in the comments because I mentioned prog rock, and you actually hear that influence. There were some keyboard lead licks, that sounded, like lead keyboard licks. But that reminded me of like some Tony Banks, who was the keyboardist for Genesis for, the beginning of Genesis. Huh. Also, it's nice that the texture evolves. Tim Follin is obviously a composer who knows something about making music interesting. And with, as you brought up, with the limited resources you might have with the hardware or the software. And to me, this is just the opening screen. I'm not sure that any context is necessary. I mean, this could be the opening screen for like Sudoku, or like it could be, a full contact backend, or, however that works, or cross-country chess. There is no context for this. It's a piece of music.
What I find really interesting is that you can feel a sense of excitement. You can feel a sense of like, I gotta push play because there's no context. it can just be interpreted like any piece that we ever listen to.
Right.
You know, you reference Genesis, and like my dad used to love Genesis, and like all of those songs elicit different emotions based on so many different variables. It's so interesting to me that it's a video game piece, and yet what makes it a video game piece because it happens to be in a video game. You know, I'd be remiss to say this is more of a general comment. Tim's brother, actually Jeff, and they worked together a lot, actually just passed away from pancreatic cancer weeks ago, which is super sad. And they were a duo. I haven't necessarily heard the works that they've done together, but it's it's always hard when. So for those of you that didn't know, or perhaps or know Tim or something, just our condolences for that. Have you heard any Legend of Zelda?
I've heard of Legend of Zelda.
This is the intro for Legend of Zelda from this was 1986, so a few years before the Pictionary piece. Apparently, something I just read here, Nintendo was going to use Ravel's Bolero, but the copyright wasn't up yet for Bolero, so Koji Kondo ended up apparently composing this in one night.
That is interesting. It takes 70 years after a piece is composed for it to possibly go into public domain, unless the estate renews the copyright. So one of the things that strikes me about this was actually a little surprising in a way, because there's a complexity. This was quite different because it was actually very textural. I mean, there were arpeggios. If this were played on piano, arpeggios, broken chords in the left hand, and a lot of material on the right, but there's also a separate bass line, bum, ba-da-dum, 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 which is, a very simplified version of the repeated snare drum in Ravel's Bolero. The interesting thing about Ravel's Bolero, and this is kind of based on things that I talked about before, is that that's a piece that is incredibly dynamic.
Yes.
Because it's not just about going from soft to loud. It's not just about loudness increasing or decreasing. That is something that's very textural. What makes it build is the fact that the orchestra, instruments join in, and it expands the range of the entire piece. And it's this huge, very slow crescendo. It's a brilliant piece when it comes to orchestration. It's sort of like it's on a loop because the materials, repeat constant. This is very different than that. Of course, Ravel's Bolero is much longer, but there's quite a bit that happens there. That, even though there is the repeated rhythmic part of the bass line, there are some changes in harmony that occur, but there's also sort of a repeated harmonic progression that exists, that kind of moves around a bit. I'm just taking a stab in the dark that he actually did compose this on and recorded it with some sort of synthesizer, playing it like a keyboard, was able to layer things, or however whatever the composer's process was. So the fact this was done in one night, in some ways is not, it's impressive, but it's not particularly surprising because there's a lot of repetition. But the thing is, you can tell that he understands musical shape and musical form because he does add things. There's also, it's nice to hear some counterpoint.
Also, that music has continued to evolve, and you get some repeated soundscapes. So Koji Kondo also composed the Super Mario music. Oh. So Zelda and Mario, are still to this day going strong. Nintendo, one of the main IPs of Nintendo, and it's really interesting because all of these pieces have really survived the test of time, and obviously they've evolved and morphed, but they've never really lost the center, the core of that adventure spirit for Zelda, for Legend of Zelda, or the feeling of joy and laughter with Mario. It's very present even in today in this age. So it's really interesting to see how we think about like Verdi, Puccini, Mozart, Rachmaninoff and stuff. It's sort of Mahler, the evolution that all of these composers take. But it's really interesting in a modern time to see. Now obviously it's not all of the same composer, so there is, but the soundscape is rooted in that composer's like vernacular, if that makes sense. It's really interesting. 20 years is a long time, you know what I mean? And like to have your style still be emulated 20 years later, it's a really interesting thing. And I feel like with Puccini, with Turandot, for instance, as a prime example, like obviously we know. So Puccini died when he was at the very end of writing Turandot. So the Act 3 is unfinished. I'm telling them, not you. I know you know that.
No. Keep going.
Could you imagine? Listen, Greg.
Well, I am retired, so I'm not your professor.
So people have tried to, as recently as Christopher Tin, he's the composer of Civilization, the Civilization game series, Civilization 5 and 6. And
my daughter loved the Civilization games.
I mean, they're so charming, they're fun, and the music is astoundingly romantic. And Christopher Tin writes in such a romantic time period, style, so it makes sense. And the story goes, Francesca Zambello's son, who is the artistic director, general director of Washington National Opera, her son was playing Civilization. She heard it. She goes, "Oh, who's that?" He says, "Christopher Tin." That's how that started. He told me on an interview that we did. And so that's how he got the gig doing this remade version of Turandot, the final act. And so everyone, there's been so many composers that have tried to emulate the style of Puccini. And it's interesting that even in the video game world, there is emulation of sound. Whether it's the original composer or not, it's a really interesting thing that we want to keep the same soundscape, whether it's for branding reasons or, whatever. But I find that really interesting how these traditions are not quite so lost despite the medium.
Yeah, it's interesting. In some ways, it's not really surprising because I think that composers in general, video game music composers and otherwise, are influenced in some way by everything they hear, whether they like it or not. Music is very revolutionary. There are very few composers that I could think who are absolutely 100% revolutionary because, art evolves from somewhere. Maybe the very first composer who was some caveman named Thog, who took two rocks and went, maybe he or she was really the first revolutionary composer. and then the next composer went, and all of a sudden rhythm was born.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, I mean, I think too, like the fact that I lost my train of thought. Poopy.
Well, clearly the train of thought was poopy.
We'll come back to it.
See, this is when they say we want the 3-hour unedited video.
Yeah, are you sure?
This is the shit they want to hear.
Sonic the Hedgehog originally came out, it looks like in 1991. This particular track is really charming. It's called Green Hill Zone. It's one of the more famous Sonic tracks.
Adding a line
on the top, man. And I would be remiss to say if I didn't wish Sonic a happy 33rd birthday. You know, I had never listened to that in its entirety, but it's like one of those more recognizable, famous, one of the most famous video game music pieces. And that's one loop that I did not get tired of. Like, it was 2 minutes in and yeah, I came back, but I loved the middle section where after it repeats and it almost like it like broke the musical tension of the like sort of change in the music. And then we went back home and it felt so good.
And what we listened to, it happened 3 times. It happened once, and that was repeated twice between the return of the main theme. So it's sort of, you know, A-B kind of form, you know, and, you know, that's maybe a B theme or a bridge or something. When those moments happened, if we're talking compositionally, it's the moment of contrast, because what defines a kind of a fixed musical form is the repetition of themes. And so that main theme, be-do, be-do, be-do-do-do, it comes back, you know, and that defines the form, is how and where it returned. That middle section is very different from that first theme. And the theme is not just the melody, it's also that, you know, the really short repeated bass notes. Right. And so this, what's kind of cool about this is, you know, as a contrasting theme, it makes use of the bass, these longer notes in the bass, and then everything else sort of sustains, but there's still, you know, there's still that same kind of eighth note rhythmic pulse that exists throughout. So, you know, in this that contrasting section, that contrasting music, there's continuity still throughout the entire piece. It's, you know, it's really very cool. In some ways, it's very simple, and I don't view simple as being a negative thing. Simplicity is actually kind of a hard thing to do well when writing music. But, you know, this was 2 minutes and 21 seconds long. The first time that happens is 43 seconds. Second time it happens is 1 minute and 20 seconds. And then the last time it's 1 minute and 58 seconds. But it is interesting because it's very, very well proportioned. The cool thing about the main theme is, while, you know, the melody is repeated throughout, again, more texture. You know, the addition of that upper line. And then I think, you know, I started singing in the second repetition of that. There's that middle counterpoint line that I noticed. That might have been there before, but I don't think it was. I don't remember.
I don't think it was either.
My first listening, I can't remember anything. It's really cool because there's more to it than just melody and chords. So there's growth that happens there. It develops. Yeah. That would make this lend itself well to orchestration, which, if the Sonic the Hedgehog movies use this theme, I have no idea if they do or not. But if they do, it's, you know, you probably hear that with a full orchestra of some sort.
Yeah, well, there's a Sonic orchestral tour, actually, of music from the games.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the thing is, you separate those lines, then, you know, you transfer them to live instrument, you get wonderful colors that you can really hear, that you can't hear with a relatively, take that with a grain of salt, but a relatively monochromatic you know, synthesized thing. It's not really monochromatic. It's not really a single color, because you can distinguish the lines really easily, and there are different timbres and whatnot. But yeah, very cool.
One of the things that I really learned in grad school, especially about repetition, that I found really interesting, was that from a singing perspective, you never want to say the same thing twice the same way. So like if, for instance, in Elixir of Love, you know, cielo si può, I palpiti senti. So you say I palpiti twice, you know, the pulsations, the fluttering of my heart. And it's like, okay, well, the first time can't be the same as the second time. They have to be different. And we're, you know, in a micro fashion, like macro wise, I don't think it really matters, but from a micro, like, how do we make this the most interesting musically?
When you're saying just then, I palpiti, you know, you actually elongate it ever so slightly. The accented syllable,
which is so funny, isn't it? I'm talking, when we're talking minutia, like, this is the thing that sometimes people don't know about opera singing, or certainly music in general. But like the ever so slight stretching and pulling of I mean, minusculely, but enough to make a shift in the way that we use a vowel or use a consonant, or even in this case, like, this could have been really repetitive if it wasn't for the fact that we did have that counterpoint and that harmony over top, or that B section that then gave us a reprieve from then going back and listening to the section again. It's these little things are so cool. The next track from Sonic is actually a bit of a meme. It's actually one of the worst song in quotes, and of course I did a video on this. Actually, it was the first time I ever heard it from the Sonic the Brotherhood. People are going to be like, why would you play this for him? But I think it's important. I think it's important because apparently what happened here, there was a licensing issue with the guy who had to do the music, and he had to redo the entire soundtrack in less than a week. It's a little funky. All right, we can stop there.
Keep going.
No, keep going. Okay. All right.
We're going to listen to this whole thing.
Okay.
We are.
Okay, that's fine.
You know, if there's no hi-hat, there's no music. Is this part of that Sonic orchestral tour?
I don't think so.
That would be awesome.
Is it as bad as the internet would make you think?
Does the internet make me think this is bad?
Well, the comments, this is how you say, please kill me in notes.
I mean, the internet doesn't make me think. Sometimes I think about the internet. Is it bad? Just remember that I'm listening to these outside of the context of actually playing or watching the gameplay,
of course,
or watching a version of gameplay and that sort of thing. I want to do some Q&A with you since you were teaching me earlier. There's a reason why I wanted to listen to more than the first half once we got to the first half. And the reason is, well, we were just talking about the Green Hill Zone. Do you know what is entirely different compositionally between this thing, Central City, and Green Hill Zone?
I mean, I have a couple ideas. I mean, there's no discernible melody, but then there kind of is, but it's like is there too many dynamics? There's too much layering. There's almost too much happening at the same time.
Well, actually, there are these moments where like it's just this weird drum sound and then some.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, that was nothing like the style of what we were listening to, of course. But so when you say that no discernible melody, is that there's very little that we can detect about what makes the melody work, because there is melody,
of course.
But what makes it different than the previous? Now, well, one, there's very little connection, but also let's just take a look at the big picture. There's very little repetition. Or if there is, it's hard to distinguish, difficult to distinguish it, because there are these little identifiable units, motives, in the melody that may tie melodic material together. It's not surprising to me that, and I'm not going to look at the comments underneath this, but it's not surprising to me that this, if feedback were required, many people would provide negative feedback. I don't like saying whether something is good or bad. I'm just going to say that there was nothing on one listening that I could find that tied this together as a piece of music that had a distinct, recognizable form that might actually speak to something emotional or something that involves thematic material. And that brings me to the fact that there's no real discernible theme on the first listening. I mean, it could be, I said last time, I think it's a good idea if you hear something for the first time to listen to it twice, even if you don't like it, because that way you can figure out what it is that you may not particularly like or enjoy. And I don't really feel like listening to this again. It's a roundabout way of saying that there is something really missing musically from here, because of the structural materials. Dynamically, it feels like one dynamic in terms of volume, but there are these textural changes, but even the textural changes don't seem to mean anything. They just sort of happen. What was constant? This is the other question I want to ask you. What was constant about this?
There was a rhythmic pulsation that was pretty much constant.
Tempo.
Yeah.
The overall, just the overall speed. Even the moments where some of the drums, we kind of ended on a place where we didn't hear the pulsation necessarily, but it was still there. Everything was still the same tempo, even though we didn't hear the pulse. But that didn't help the fact that there was no discernible form or repetition on the first listening.
I played it 1% as a joke and 98% as 99% of why. Wow, my math, oh boy. 99% more of what makes a song bad, and if there really is, are we just doing mental gymnastics around calling something what it is, and that's like a poorly composed, or is there really a reason for why something structurally doesn't work, and you just sort of explained it, I think, but it's interesting. I think it was worth playing for that just to talk about, the thematic elements and what's missing from it and why it doesn't necessarily speak to us in the same way. Well, let's move on to something less jumbly. We talked a lot last time. That's a good segue. Final Fantasy VI is around the same time period, and this particular piece is by renowned and beloved composer Nobuo Uematsu. This is 1994. This is Dancing Mad. This is Kefka's essential journey. This is a final boss theme, boss being a main antagonist. Floated around, I don't know if it was the original review for Final Fantasy VI or something, but someone said, for a composer, the SNES sound chip is like using crayons. Uematsu used crayons to paint the Sistine Chapel, which is a very interesting comment, and congrats on getting through. You're the only person I've ever played a 17-minute and 41-second song for, and hopefully it was worth it. But it's a very interesting piece, and it's certainly one of the densest. Yeah,
I mean, I've heard the name Final Fantasy, but again, I know nothing about it. I know nothing about any of this stuff. I don't know the storyline or anything like that. This is an interesting piece of music for me for a lot of reasons. It is gripping throughout, as something independent of video games. So it makes you wonder, am I listening to video game music, or am I listening to early 1970s prog rock?
And the influence was there big time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, the opening, I brought up Genesis before, I'm bringing it up again, but the opening is very much like the opening to Watcher of the Skies from Genesis' Foxtrot album, which was, 1973, I think. And when they played it live, it was a very visual thing also, because Gabriel did all kinds of theatrics, and he wore makeup, and and these goggles with lights that in them, and it was a very, very theatrical thing that he did in front of this band that basically they were all seated and playing, and very different than the Genesis that a lot of people know. And this is very early stuff about the music rather than the theatrics. So the opening is very much like that in terms of both texture, because it opens up with sustained organ. It's not a Hammond organ, it's not a Farfisa. I forget what kind of organ particular organ make it is, but it starts with that the sustained organ chords, and then there is rhythmic elements come in, and driving bass and whatnot. What's interesting about this is that repeats twice. Well, the first time 2 minutes, and the second time at 4 minutes. But the third time it repeats, and you only hear the first 30 seconds or so before there's that huge contrast, and then we are introduced to that the bit where there's the sampled singer that sounds like she's choking on something. It sounds like she swallowed a chicken bone or something. That's just the timbre. I mean, it's cool music. Well,
1,000,000%. I mean, you can't fake it.
It's interesting using a synthetic vocal sound that way, so that it is part of the texture, and then you actually hear it develop into a full voice, because you do get sustained voices and whatnot. When you saw this live, I asked if there were singers. I'm sure there were singers. Was there a singer doing that bit?
It was the tenors. It was the tenor section,
and they were just singing staccato, kind of. Okay. Right. Did they use an organ?
It was off to the side. I was actually really impressed. No, I didn't see any pipes, but it was certainly it wasn't like a church. It was like a standard like a larger piano,
like a MP3 or something like that. Right?
Yes, it wasn't like the ones that you see where they're up against the wall and the pipes come out. It's not like
I understand. It's still that makes sense, because that's the kind of organ that would have been used by Tony Banks in Genesis or whatnot.
Yes.
So I'm not going to dwell on Genesis this whole hour, but it's funny how there were two things now that reminded me of that era of that band. But anyway, what made this engaging? Well, one is that there was repetition. Seems to be maybe that's the theme of today's thing, at least so far. There's a combination of the simple and the complex in the materials. Mm-hmm. There's that huge contrast at about 4 minutes and 35 seconds or so that also introduces the vocal sounds, and then there's the pipe organ solo that happens at 6:10 or so. That organ solo, which is supposed to sound like a Bach toccata. The music totally is, but it's obviously it comes from somewhere. So that brings the whole influence thing that we were talking about earlier into the fold. Yeah. There's more at about 6:35 or so. There's more of the thing, and then the same amount of time later, we get the repeated pipe organ solo until phase 3 happens. The third section happens, and the chimes, that's what, it signals the change of that, the addition of that particular color. And it's also, interesting that the organ has changed from that rock and roll organ to something that's supposed to sound like a pipe organ. And so it's this, and it's not exactly a pipe organ. It might be, but I'm assuming that most of these are synthesized sounds, but after phase 3, it's interesting. That fade out is interesting.
The reset almost.
Yeah. Before we get to that real proggy, the mixed meters, which in some ways is very complex, but man, it has that catchy cadence that happens. That comes back. You can actually almost predict where that's going to happen again, even though the materials within there, the rhythmic materials and everything else, are so complex. The complexity isn't particularly difficult to listen to. It's actually, it's natural. It is the groove of that section, and it's cool. What is particularly interesting to me is the coda at about, 16 minutes in or so. I mean, I call it a coda. I don't know if that's what it is. But the last minute and a half of the piece or so brings back the opening, but then closes with the fourth phase, or brings back those things. So it actually ties everything together that we've experienced.
If I recall correctly, Kefka is the Joker of the Emperor. He eventually manipulates the Emperor, kills the Emperor, throws the Emperor off this like floating island, takes over, destroys the planet, and then somehow deifies himself. And so we're fighting here in these different phases. Is essentially this tower that he's sort of constructed, and each phase is a different portion of until you get to him, and that phase 4, and phase 4 is him as a god essentially. So he's a joker the whole time. He looks kind of silly, and like he kind of like he gets trampled, but Kefka does terrible things in this game. He like poisons an entire village, their water. So he's a really bad man. And this is the moment that we sort of confront him and fight him, phase 4 being the phase. And that's why you hear his laughter, and that's why you hear his theme, which we don't know because I didn't play it for you, but like his theme, it plays in there. And so there's a leitmotif callback, very Wagnerian in that particular case. And so phase 4 is really about fighting Kefka, the god version of Kefka. And the journey is essentially each phase is climbing up this rung until we get to himself, and the screen is bright, almost like angelic, like the screen is bright yellow, like the sun is shining, and Kefka is like purple and deformed, and he's in this muscular fit version of himself. And so it's very like God versus man sort of scenario.
Wow.
Which I remember I told Garth, because I played another track for Garth from a different Final Fantasy, he's like, you ever get tired of fighting?
Don't you get a bit bored of just having endless battles?
Do you ever get tired?
Do you ever get tired of fighting?
Yes.
But it's interesting because that's very much the trope of Final Fantasy as a series, is fighting God.
I'm listening to the music for the first time, and you experienced hearing this, with a full orchestra and a chorus in Carnegie Hall. So apart from the fact that you weren't experiencing the game necessarily, actively, what was different? I mean, like, what did you really experience that was different than listening to this particular, the original version?
Yeah. Well, one of the big things that really stood out to me was the volume. Now, granted, these things were mic'd, and there's microphone placement, so like monitors and things, so it was quite loud throughout, actually. But what I really felt was size and stature in terms of the organ being front and center, the way that the dynamics and the texture actually translated from this to live orchestral playing was almost a 1-to-1.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
And sometimes it doesn't work because there were other tracks on the concert from other pieces that didn't work as well. But this translated insanely well. And it was almost like hearing this MIDI, like the synthesized version, but live. It was so clean. And the prog rock section with the drum set and the back was phenomenal. Like you felt it in your bones. It was so cool.
So are you saying, because remember, dynamics, it's not just about loudness. I mean, volume, there's all the changes in texture and density and all that is, I said remember as if I'm lecturing you. I'm sorry.
Tell me, well, because we talked about it.
Yeah. Well,
it's stuck to my mind.
It's interesting to me that doing this live, when you have so many more options with live musicians and different colors that you might, this is not a put in, it's just something that's coming to my mind, that you might try and mimic the whole thing exactly. Because what's the point in paying, money to go to a concert where you're hearing everything exactly the same as you might on your stereo or your gaming system or whatever it is that you listen to music in. And so, now obviously take that with a grain of salt, because, there is the live experience. There is the fact that, okay, well, I'm doing this independent of the game, and then there can be other pieces from the various finals fantasies. They are plural. It strikes me as interesting that the one that the dynamics seem to be 1-to-1 in your mind, like they seem to be the same. I should go to one of these concerts. I should do this.
I don't feel the width of the sound.
The three-dimensionality.
Yes. Whereas with the live performance, you feel that because you're looking at the strings, you hear the choir, you hear the organ, you hear the drum set, and whatever the piece is. Now, to be fair, I do think they are one-to-one.
Yeah.
Essentially not replica, but that cheapens it. But what I mean is like you're going there to hear the music that you know live without that many changes. Let's put it that way. However, the width of the dynamics and the texture was what really stood out to me of hearing Dancing Mad live. Mm-hmm. Whereas this one kind of can sound samey at times, even though there's variation in phases and different things. With the live version, it felt very much like, wow, I'm witnessing something, but also like they never do this. So for me, it was also like, oh my God, I'm witnessing like a once in a lifetime experience because they never include Dancing Mad because of the things required to produce it at a high level or difficult to find. Well, and you need a really good organist and so on and so forth.
Well, plus the audio that we just listened to is 30 years old. You know, when you listen to something live, it's, unless they're absolutely replicating everything, in terms of the time, you're actually hearing some things with maybe new technology or things that might be, somewhat updated. It's an interesting thing. It's like going to see, an old band. Well, if Genesis were still around, which they're not, but it's like going to see them. I don't know if you're going to see them now, if they were playing now. I mean, it would be very different. It wouldn't be the exact same thing that you hear in the 1970s. I want to ask you a question, and I hope that this bit, and I know that people want to hear music instead of just yammering, but I think this is an important question to ask, and it's an important question to think about. If and I'm kind of considering the comments that I read the last time I was here, what is the thing that really moves you about any piece of music?
For me, what's always driven me is not how the experience is in the game. Really, for me, and the reason why I even started down the path of music was that it was a medium for self-expression. Mm-hmm. And what I find that I admire and love about music, and what keeps me doing this every single day where I sit down and think about or talk about or reflect on music, is the fact that there is so much emotion that exists within music, and good composers, or any composer, are, whether they realize it or not, are actively trying to express themselves. Mm-hmm. And this is a question for you, of course. Express themselves, even if they're like, you got to eat. So like, even if you're doing like a project mm-hmm. or something, it's like, just because it's for money doesn't mean it's not full of emotion and musicality. The thing that I always loved about opera was that I was taking the language of a composer and then somehow expressing it through me as a filter so that they, the audience, could also then feel an emotion that maybe I felt, maybe they feel a different one. But that was always the thing I loved about the job, because I felt that it was my responsibility to allow people to connect to themselves more deeply through music that was composed by somebody else. And so my dad always used to say, well, don't you ever want to sit down and just compose? And I'm like, no, I'm not a composer, I'm an interpreter. And that's something that I have always prided myself in doing. And so accidentally, this YouTube channel, by talking about some of the things that I hear through music, that's how I hope to allow people to be like, oh yeah, that's why I thought about that character when I heard this theme, because that's actually their theme. Or like, listen to how this descending thing sounds sad. It makes me feel sad. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it is sad in that interpretation. So that long answer is that's why I love music.
Well, but I didn't ask why. But I wasn't asking why. But it's a beautiful answer. Okay, well then you're talking about like the emotional content and the self-expression. But there are also, when I write music, and particularly if I'm writing on commission, or if I know exactly what performer or performers or ensemble who I'm writing for, it's never going to work unless I make sure that I write for their strengths, or write something that the performers can identify with. But of course, it has to be my music, and I would hope that they wouldn't ask me to write something if they didn't particularly like what I do. But I mean, it's an important sort of thing to realize. And so I'm not just going to write something that has no connection. So, we collaborate a little bit. So, but the thing is that where expression comes from, what is the expressive element in music? Because, a lot of people like to dwell on melody, and it's not melody. alone, because, melody doesn't really exist without harmony, and harmony is not just chords. Melodies are harmonic things also, but also rhythmic is harmonic. Rhythm is harmonic. If you think about, you start playing something, rhythmic, and then it just stops rather than finishes. But if something just stops, it might be on any beat of a bar, but when it finishes, it might be like on the downbeat of the next bar or something like that. So, but it could be interesting to just stop and then create a contrast or something like that. And that is something that could be expressive. There are lots of things that are sort of different. And I go back to dynamics, and texture, and then the color of the instruments in combination or solo or whatnot. And all of those things are really interesting. And so far, what we've listened to with Pictionary, Legend of Zelda, and the 2 sonic pieces, and the 1.5 sonic pieces, and this Final Fantasy. They're all, of course, different from each other. And this Final Fantasy, it's also, we listened to it a huge. It's a huge piece compared to the rest of them, and it had more. So there was more room for it to change and evolve and all those things. But they all sound, as far as loudness is concerned, they're all basically the same dynamic level. And so I think about expression because I knew when I asked the question, the kind of thing that you were probably going to say, because a long time ago we've had a similar conversation. I think I didn't ask the question the same way. But when you repeat something, you don't necessarily want to do it the same way. It's like, bring back an earlier topic. It's hard for me to think about what is expressive when everything is at this kind of one volume or this one, this one level out of context. So when I listen to a piece of music that is unfamiliar to me for the very first time, and I want to think about, what makes this expressive, or what makes this work in terms of just the technical aspects of the thing, the structure, or, melody plus bass plus chord plus all these things. When I do that, for the very first time, I try and ignore those things that I can already predict. Like, I'm going to bring up Anton Webern. Actually, I was thinking about Webern with Sonic Dark Brotherhood, because of the texture of this bebop, underneath. And Webern didn't really have the driving rhythm. But what makes Webern tricky is that it isn't the notes. It's not the pitches. It's the fact that the texture is so pointillistic, and that we don't have what we perceive as a continuous melodic line. What Webern did is redefine melody on his own terms to be the changing of the colors of the instrument. And so what he, created as melody, which was often based on a series of notes in whatever order he chose, rather than something that might be in G major.
Right.
He found expression on his own terms of being how these colors of instruments, maybe clarinet, then bassoon, then violin, then something, each playing one or two notes at a time, and then that creates his melody. And so expression is such a strange thing to talk about in other people's music. And this is why I like talking to you about music, Marco, is because, you spend so much time performing, singing, you've spent time on stage, you're involved in not just singing and recital, but, singing opera, and then you actively engage here, and you isolate the music from something with a context, and you find expression in that. Yeah, the thing is, when we're done with this session in another 9 hours, we're gonna. What was I saying?
I don't know.
I wasn't listening either. I don't know.
You've been too busy making jokes. I
know. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, the thing I was going to say is that I think that I'm going to go back and listen to Sonic Dark Brotherhood Central City, just to see, try and figure out why that was composed, the way, to become what it became, because it's just a curiosity, because it's so different than everything else that I've heard so far.
For sure. And that was why I put it in there, because I wanted it to be like a little a little head tilting.
Yeah.
I made a video called The Worst Video Game Music of All Time, and which is hard for me because like I always really do try to see like, but some of these are really terrible. And that song was suggested by the community, and when I really started to listen to it, I'm like, it's not terrible, but it does sound like a 12-year-old that is sitting down for the first time at a Casio tone keyboard and is trying to like figure out their way around music. And I think it's a worthwhile thing to talk about. So next up is from Halo 3. It's called Deference for Darkness. It's from Halo 3 ODST. I don't actually know what that stands for. Players assume the roles of United Nations Space Command Marines known as Orbital Drop Shock Troopers, ODST. Furiously writing.
No, well, there's a lot to say. My first reaction is I don't know what makes this a piece of video game music. The thing that I'm kind of grateful for, it's strikingly different than anything else this session and the previous that we've heard, that we've really listened to, because we don't get a sense of tempo. We don't get the driving thing. We have this very, very, what feels sort of very free introduction, with the solo piano and this introduction, and then at about 54 seconds in, we get a theme enters, a melody enters along with, which is part of the theme, which is this lush string arpeggiations and whatnot that lasts for 30 seconds or so, and then there's more sustain. And the arpeggiation ends. 15 seconds after that, we hear a return of the melodic motive in that saxophone sound the synthetic sax, and it sounds like it's supposed to be a saxophone. Not one of the most.
Is it synthetic?
Well, yeah, it's not a saxophone. It sounds like it attempted to sample a saxophone. I don't want to put that down as far as, you know, it's bad music, because it's not.
You've written a lot for saxophone.
Yeah, I would like to. I mean, the thing is, this is a piece of music that would be very interesting to hear, you know, in a concert, you know, with an actual saxophonist. With an actual, you know, actual musicians. But the thing is that it's interesting, because at the 54-second mark, we hear this theme. It's based on a really simple motivic idea, and, you know, the melody expands like almost immediately, and continues to use that same little germ of an idea, you know, transposed and modified and expanded, you know, around. And then, you know, 145. The saxophone brings it in once, and then it's followed by these low strings who kind of expand it. So we're actually doing something. We're just sort of trading the colors and allowing the color to be a part of this beautiful lyric melody. It's quite a lovely piece of music for that. And then, you know, after the low strings, you know, play for about 10 or 15 seconds, it builds. The range expands in the violins. At about 220 or so, the piano returns, and, you know, with more saxophone, rather than just sort of that motive. The saxophone is obviously figures important, you know, it figures to be something important during the course of this. And, you know, and it's a slow song end, but, you know, the thing is the ending, that little piano gesture that's at the very beginning, that's how the piece ends. So there are these elements of repetition that are sort of, you know, in a different order than like when we were talking about Sonic the Hedgehog. So, I mean, but it's this beautiful kind of arch-like, you know, a form. It's quite lovely. I can't imagine fighting for your life during this, you know?
No, certainly not.
Don't get
certainly
tired of fighting all the time. Well, if Garth watches this, he's going to give me a lot of grief about how terrible my accents are. But
if you haven't seen that episode, I'll put it right up here.
I mean, I don't have much more to say about this than sort of thinking about the time. It's beautifully timed, beautifully structured, but I can't think of it. I mean, I think of this as this feels like a complete piece or a movement of a
from the game,
of a suite or something like that. And this actually has every element of dynamic contrast, because it does use volume as part, you know, like part of dynamics. Is very quiet, but it does build, you know, and so I keep doing this, but it does build into, you know, to this kind of thick, lush texture and whatnot. It's refreshing to hear something without driving drums, for something in one of these sessions. Yeah, it's a beautiful little piece. You know, it's interesting, you know, because I guess, you know, budgets in video games, obviously it's a very different kind of an undertaking than doing something for the stage or doing something for film or whatnot. It's you have limited access to things, so a lot of things are synthetic. I didn't really mean to put down the saxophone sound. The thing is, I heard saxophone, or, you know, I hear this as a saxophone melody, but I found with you know, when I use sort of similar software that makes use of sampled sounds of orchestral instruments, or, you know, including saxophone and whatnot. Saxophone it's hard to capture that in the same way that a lot of these companies have been able to capture strings, which is also very difficult. It's an interesting thing, because obviously Marty and Michael they hear these very specific colors and want to replicate them as much as possible, which is part of composition. I mean, before I even think about melody, I often really think about color and what instruments I'm going to use. And, you know, and the same thing with voice types. I mean, it's very different writing for a lyric tenor than it is for a spinto tenor, you know. It's a very different thing to do. And I even think of instruments the same way.
Let's listen to another slower piece. This is from Mass Effect 3, and it's called Leaving Earth. Quite a bit of repetition in that one too. That is the theme of today's episode, isn't it? Repetition.
You can say that again.
Oh God! But the upper register is it's such a powerful dynamism where you have the lower big sort of chord, and then in the upper register you have at the very extreme of the upper register you have that thing, right? I mean, it's a real like mood setter, isn't it? It's so cheeky.
Yeah, the thing is, it's in G major, but everything is about leading to E minor. You know, so as well, it's really, I guess, it's really an E minor kind of modal, but it's so simple. This is a very interesting use of dynamics because the piano color it's so soft, yet it carries through everything else that happens, that builds throughout. I mean, because then you have the big chords and I guess it's sort of strings and whatnot. But the thing that's also interesting is insertion, like early on of that big sort of distorted bass sound, which I guess has something to do with some sort of action or event that is taking place.
It's aliens destroying the Earth.
Yeah, and because if I were to destroy the Earth.
Well, that's the people trying to escape and the somberness of...
Yeah, because if I were going to run away, this is what I listen to. No, but I'm sure it's a very dynamic moment. And I like the idea of, I mean, if there is this sort of frantic thing, and we might see this in films and whatnot, is that often there might be something very slow and lyric. I think the use of Barber's Adagio for strings, during Platoon... and which is, I really wish that wasn't used in Platoon because it's such a beautiful piece of music and Platoon is such a rough watch. The use of it, I mean, everything's simple underneath. It's wonderful because it's a way that, depending again, if people are trying to escape and you see this on the screen, people are escaping and it's frantic. To see that contrast, it leaves room for you to, you see this kind of frantic energy visually, but you have this really incredibly melancholy music underneath that's very slow and sustained. Talk about something that's very effective on emotions. That can be an incredibly effective tool in scoring anything. This piece of music might exist on its own. It certainly could. The reason why it was composed was to create that conflict in your heart, both frantic energy and just total empathy, perhaps or sympathy or empathy for the people who are leaving their home. I guess I should actually see if I can watch
the scene. Yeah. Oh, 1,000,000%. Yeah. Maybe it's how we interpret words and stuff. But do you feel like simple is a negative word, like in terms of composition?
No, simple is hard. I never mean it in a negative light because simplicity is a very difficult thing to find. I mean, you can say that in life. As you go through life, man, you're dying for something that's simple. And we can go back to Sonic the Hedgehog thing, the Dark Brotherhood, the Central City. In some ways, there's nothing simple about that because it just keeps going and meandering. But it's not like the materials that are a part of that. I mean, there are these simple textures that are not used effectively during the course of the piece. There is a simplicity in Sonic the Hedgehog Green Hill Zone because of the structure and the way it repeats. And that's actually a good kind of simplicity. So it depends on the context of the word. But there's a simplicity because the musical materials, it's not like you have these long flowing melodies, but instead it relies on these sustained chords and then this repeated fifth. That, when compounded with whatever's going on in the bass, that was the best I could do to imitate those distorted sounds. I
thought it was quite good.
That contrasting color. Also, it's not like it's, some kind of, running mixed meter and all of that. It's just that one contrasting sound, very simply used and placed, in terms of time, placed at the right moment. I actually, when I taught composition, I urged my students to try and be very, very simple because when you have something simple, you can make it more complex. When you have something that you conceive something very, in a very complex way, it's very hard to remove the materials to simplify. Tchaikovsky wrote these beautiful melodies, and they are long and they are lush and they are very beautifully constructed and they're singable and all that. But they're difficult to put in a piece like a symphony in order to maybe fragment and develop them so that when they come back, they're new and fresh. Because like, what do you do with that beautiful material? And like, this is nothing like Tchaikovsky. This is more like, I don't know. This doesn't really sound like Arvo Pärt, but Arvo Pärt, relies on simplicity to create the expression that he does. He writes a lot of sacred music in a very emotional way, but uses very minimal materials to do it. And often it centers around a single chord.
All right. Well, in that case, let's go to something not simple. This is from Bloodborne again. This is our second listening to Bloodborne. It's called Gehrman the First Hunter.
Nice surprise there. I could hear this being longer because of the nature of music and the way it unfolds. There's sort of a slow burn in this piece. This is actually a really good piece of music to talk about development of musical material. What was different, while there are melodic motives that come back, it's not like there's a melody that repeats, just little ideas that expand and contract and then expand again. It begins so simply. The nice thing about simple is that you can build from simple. Like the opening of Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, it comes to that chord, and it sustains, and then it's repeated a third higher, and then it's, and then everything expands, and then we start getting some contrasting elements and whatnot. But it begins so simply to allow this build that happens. This is the first piece that we've listened to that effectively uses, well, I think I might have said this about the last one, but in a very different way. This is the first piece we heard that uses all of the elements of dynamics, all the parts of what dynamics are in this very, very long, gradual way. What is really striking is the moment you caught me reacting to this at about 3 minutes, about two-thirds of the way through, almost two-thirds of the way, about 3 minutes, there's this huge dynamic and textural change. They use them so effectively that this moment at 3 minutes and 8 seconds, we go to nothing. But it's like, how do we get to nothing? We crescendo, and then it's gone. And then
snatch it.
And then almost seamlessly, the material returns, and then we have the surprise of the voices being added. And what are these voices? Well, they're high sopranos and high tenors, and those most uncomfortable tessituras to sing in, but very effective. That's the performance of this would be. But imagine performing this, though, it would be a very difficult performance to do as a singer in a choir. It's a neat piece of music.
I like how it's very powerful, and it's that slow, drawn out, and not dissimilar to Dancing Mad. There is a significant payout, but the journey is a little bit different, and certainly the emotional landscape is also very different. Like having the cello be such a strongly focused accent, I think around 2 minutes, where you really feel I can't remember, but like there's a real sense of loss that I think is really apparent and very satisfying to listen to. It's quite a powerful piece.
So now people are going to wonder about this. They're also going to wonder about my hair.
You look so sophisticated.
I am sophisticated.
Actually, your hair is perfect for the next piece because it's a bit of a headbanger. This is some more Guilty Gear for you, because last time you expressed a great desire in Guilty Gear.
Did I?
This is a pretty recent one, just like ABBA's.
Yes, because I have my notes from last time also here.
Yeah, you loved Guilty Gear.
Queen ABBA, Black Flag, Styx, and Saga.
That's right, and this one is called El Felt's theme. It's called Extras.
Ignite the drive in your soul. It's calling you. What can
awesome.
a blast.
It's so much fun. You seem to really lean into the Guilty Gear. That was the thing that I noticed last time, but also, is it like, do you like it because it's composed well, these tracks, or do you like them because, and do you like them because they like remind you of, I don't know, bands that you used to like or listen to?
Well, I like any music that's composed well. But you asked, the other part of your question is, does it remind me of, bands and things in my past? I had a very diverse musical experience growing up with very different kinds of music all at once, as part of my life. And so, genre, I don't even know what genres are anymore. It doesn't matter, because what links everything together is, we could say, is it composed well? And then you go into the complex question, what does it make a piece be composed well? But what, the things that obviously I'm addressing here more than anything else, aside from dynamics, is structure and proportion. There was a moment, it was about 350. It was at 408, because, that matters. But it does, because that's the point in the piece. There was this huge contrast, and there's the verse about, I think it began, I fell down. Is that the right words? I don't remember, but it's this, kind of the lyric thing. And I knew, maybe it was because of the picture on the YouTube or something, or whatever this game is about. I knew that something like that was going to happen, partly because of the contrast between the two voices, because there's obviously conflict between the two of them. And I would imagine, I'm not trying to stereotype, but one of them was the good guy, one of them was the bad guy, and there is this conflict. And there's an interesting point. I'm jumping around so much now, but there's an interesting point at 3:15 where the metal voice sings Hallelujah, and then goes into singing, I call it an earworm chorus. The voices sort of change roles.
They swap, and
which makes this interesting, because it's something that I do need to hear again to really try and get the context of words, but also, words aside, we're talking about music. There is form. There's these moments with Hallelujah. I think it's the word drive. Drive. Somebody's yelling drive. And that structurally, because that returns, is particularly important. But the big contrast with I Fell Down, it's interesting where that comes in the piece. The piece is on its way to conclusion. And so, the thing is, I could predict that was coming because of some signals that happened beforehand. And when that happens, I'm thinking, okay, so now how do we get back to the metal? And that's another slow burn, because it does happen. It happens at about 4:35. That contrast sort of builds into it. And then it becomes this hard, this kind of, this is really kind of pop punk.
For sure.
It comes right into that. At that moment, it goes back into that, and then there's that really cool coda that starts about 5:20. But I love that guitar break in the middle too. I know.
It's such an engaging piece. You know what I mean? It like makes you want to keep listening. It's really, really, really fun. I have more tracks, but would you want to listen to another Guilty Gear, or shall we move on?
I don't know. How depends. How similar are these?
This one's pretty wild. The one I want to play.
Yeah, let's go ahead and let's do another Guilty Gear.
This is called Drift. Happy Chaos's theme.
It took me 10 years to find the answer to something I forgot about it in 2 seconds. That's about it. took me 10 years to find the answer something. I forgot about it in 2 seconds. I don't have anything that's really important to me. That's why everything is beautiful. Of the living, the ironic rhythm is a grand orchestra. It's never the same tone. Who wants to stop this? There can be when the violent storm is over. Blue sky is more beautiful than ever. You see, I want that. I will that. That's all I want. I dream tonight. Find the waves. I'll just be a black sea. I dream tonight. Please don't stop the flow. I dream tonight with wandering curves.
Nice.
Yeah, they're all, especially these newer Guilty Gear tracks, they're all very, very unique, and they really move in interesting ways that I think sets them aside from standard stuff that you would maybe hear on the radio. I mentioned last episode that you were in that, you know, I don't know that the general public is prepared to listen to this on the radio, or the radio stations are not prepared to play it, and I think it's so unique and so interesting, and it's really become one of my favorite things to talk about on the channel, because there's like so much, from a characterization perspective, there's really a lot to uncover. Like, there's so many shifts in that, and it's like, well, clearly that's because of Happy Chaos's, you know, chaos in the name. You know, there's a degree of like constantly shifting, and I find that really interesting to like sort of break down characterization from the music.
So when you are actually using an actual song, you know, I mean, this is a song. The last thing we heard was a song.
Yeah.
The other things are more pieces rather than songs. The lyrics imply a story and whatnot, but at the same time, I guess during these things you're fighting. When the fight's over, does the song just stop?
To be honest, I don't know, because I don't know where this fits into the... Someone in the comments, if you could let us know.
Happy Chaos's theme and extras are actually very similar in structure, despite them being very different in content. Here we have an introduction. In this case, it's jazz, and then it goes right into this kind of metal swing, which evolves into, 200 Eyes on Me, which is this hardcore, thing. There's a return to that metal swing at about 2 minutes and 20 seconds or so, something like that. And then there's a very brief return to the jazz, brief reference to it, like for 10 seconds, back to the hardcore. So now if you think about what happened with extras, it's a similar timing proportionally, and like where the guitar break comes in extras is about the same place, close to the same place, kind of, similar to where the jazz opening returns. It's really kind of cool because they're very different kinds of music in a way. 4/16, we have that bit. I forget what the lyrics are, so I'm actually going to rewind a little bit just to look at the lyrics so that everybody knows where I am. But it's at 4/16. And it's where, the voice that sounds like if Freddie Mercury was a baritone, can you hear the pulses of the living? And that's about the same place in this particular song, the same place in terms of the whole overall proportion, as that I Fell Down happens in extras.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that.
It's very similar. This is about 8 seconds longer than extras. It's actually exactly 8 seconds. I Fell Down happens at 4:08 in extras. It happens at 4:16 in this particular song. That's an interesting bit of timing considering there's an 8-second difference, 5:38 versus 5:46. I didn't really notice that till just now, but I'm going, hey, this composer / songwriter knows exactly what they're doing. I'm not saying that everything has to fit into a formula, but we were talking earlier about influences and styles, and people have their own modes of expression, their own styles, and all of that. This person is, if I'm just judging on these two, which I'm not really judging, it's just a fact. That may or may not have been an accident, whatever. But there's a method. There is a method to what this person is doing. That's really cool to find immediately. It's one of the reasons why this works also. But the Strashers overall are very similar.
It's really cool. I didn't even catch that. That's awesome. Because they sound so different. Yeah. You know what I mean? They have elements that are similar, but in terms of like they're like the way that the emotion is carried across and also the soundscape is pretty interesting. Both of these are sort of unique in their own way, but I find it really interesting that through all that there is still a structured like anchor for both of them. It's really neat. But let's do something fun.
I hate fun.
This is in the balance. This is a Nald Falls theme. So at one point in Final Fantasy XIV, you meet the gods of the land. There's 12 of them, and this is the god of money.
was watching what was going on because there's what appears to be gameplay going on.
That's how you do those. They're called raids, and there's all the visual cues to help you understand like where to avoid, where to move. Then every job there has a different.
So here's the thing. At some point I'll go and I'll listen to the end of this to see if there's a cadence or a way that it actually ends. After this video is nearly 12 minutes long. You finish this thing that you're doing, this raid. Does the song just stop? I mean, does it just stop? Yeah, and so it'll stop in the middle of a word.
There's probably an outro that's the system in place to like sequence it. If I remember correctly, they do kind of just fade out and they stop.
The reason why I'm asking is related to what we were just talking about with the Guilty Gear songs. These seem to be composed as complete pieces of music. If the player is awesome, it shortchanges the music in gameplay.
True.
There's something here because as a piece of music, it's fun. It's repetitive. It's got this cool meter that's sort of in 6. It's a 4+2, in 6 for most of it, and then it goes into this kind of 8 count thing that's really neat. What gets me though with how much we listen to, the orchestral build underneath is really good. It's subtle until you really pay attention to it, and then you go, wow. The orchestration underneath the verses and like just adding these little flourishes and some sustained lines and some things like that creates a build that otherwise this would just be repetitious. When I think about that, is that like, well, what if you finish the level? I doubt that it's likely, or it might be likely. I don't know. But if you finish the level or you finish this raid like 2 minutes, then you actually miss a lot of these details, these gorgeous details in the score. I said it before. There aren't many composers who want their music necessarily relegated to the background. If you write something, and I mean, not that you can pay attention to all of it, and I did get there were some really good comments about that in response to that, that were really good comments that talk about, well, sometimes when I play, I've got to turn off the music in order to focus, or some folks, said
extend it so they can...
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting to hear the response to that. I think about this and how wonderful some of this music is, and I'm glad that there are soundtracks to these. I mean, because somebody was talking about that, you can actually, listen to the soundtracks on their own because they're worth listening to. I mean, because they are composed pieces of music, and the composers took time to
compose them well, and that's really the thing too. It's like, it is incredible that a piece of music could be so satisfying, and yet you only will hear maybe 5 minutes of it, depending on the skill level for whatever game. Like Gehrman the First Hunter, if you're really efficient, you're not going to be in there very long listening to that, because that would play underneath the fight.
Absolutely. I think that's why everybody should get really, really good at Sonic Central City, so that if they don't have to listen to that all the way through. Everybody should practice Sonic Dark Brotherhood.
Practice that level.
Central City. Just play it over and over again so you never have to listen to it again.
Let's start with Children of the Omnissiah. And this is composed by Guillaume David, and it's one of the best soundtracks I've ever listened to.
That's very different than anything we've heard today. Probably the most minimalist in terms of the the American definition of minimalist music. You do hear there are these moments where actually I get a little bit of like Philip Glass ensemble with some of the arpeggiations that just that occur on an organ, but the steady state, quarter notes and but the whole thing felt like one continuous phrase with these little sub phrases in there. It's certainly connected.
The children's choir too is such a nice little addition, a little voice in the background when you have this low grumbled choir underneath.
It's soft yet it carries.
I love thinking about these kinds of things, like why is that there, and obviously it's all up for interpretation because I'm not Guillaume, so I don't know what he chose to write, but also Guillaume might have just been like, I put that in there because it sounded good, and whatever people interpreted, that's also fair. I mean, I guess that's a question for you too. Like, do you care what people feel about your music, like how they interpret whatever they hear? So, like, if you write something and your intention is to write cacophony or like sorrow, but they actually hear, I mean, if it's possible, they hear happiness or they hear joy. Does it bother you?
If I intend to evoke a particular emotion and the listener doesn't hear that particular emotion or doesn't get the particular intention, if the context is clear also, then I don't know that I've done what I'm supposed to do effectively. On the other hand, I'm trying to think of a good example of a composer from the long past where maybe our emotional response today, maybe 200 years later, is different than what the composer intended, if the composer intended something like that, then I would imagine that may be okay because, the history between then and now has changed what the context of the piece is. So, I mean, with that in mind, I mean, I don't want to say that it would bother me or not, because I think, as you even said earlier, you're an interpreter of music. You do have to interpret things. There are interpretations, and that ultimately is your decision. It may get you fired. Well, somebody made a comment about music not being the universal language, but it may be a universal means for universal idea.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, because I don't think music is a universal language. Because what we might perceive also, or what I might create as something that might be really happy or really sad, may be perceived as the exact opposite in a completely different culture. I do have intentions in the music that I write. If I don't do them well, they're not going to be interpreted the way I want them.
Speaking of your music, why don't you go ahead and flash that CD one more time? GregoryWanamaker.com. Just kidding. Could you imagine?
What do you mean, could you imagine? I do have a GregoryWanamaker.com.
No, I meant the ad read I just did. If you'd like to buy yourself a copy of Light and Shadows, Waves and Time, well, head on over to Gregory.
No, I wouldn't put it on one of those things where you put the needles on them, because I don't have those. But I would love to make a vinyl version of this at some point, and then melt it down so I can stick it in a CD player. Or cut it up into tiny, tiny bits, smaller than MP3s, so they could all fit in my pocket. Not any pocket, like this one, the one that you put the change in. That one. Yeah,
the little one.
I just showed change skin there. So I didn't mean to make this about me.
Well, it kind of is about you, because I'm
the guest.
That's for the thumbnail.
So you have to do it.
That's for the thumbnail. Genshin Impact does something really well in that each of the regions that we go to tend to be based on real life places. This particular track, called Sumeru, is the main city of this region that has an Indian, Persian, Middle Eastern soundscape to it.
Land between the two instruments. This is live, too.
Yeah, it is. All their music is recorded live.
That's what a saxophone sounds like. Of your reaction, do you think, is in relation to the fact that it's a real orchestra and a real dynamic, high fidelity recording?
I think it helps immensely because I think I really like it when it's done with a real orchestra. I mean, there's a quality in the recording itself that really elevates it when it's real. If it's really good and it's fake and synthesized, I don't really have a problem because music is music. But that is very special because of the way it's recorded.
I mean, like, I'm not opposed to digitally created sounds and that sort of thing. I mean, because music is music. And it doesn't necessarily change the material that's being used, but there's something about all the possibilities, and I'm going to say it again, especially with all the dynamic possibilities when you have live instruments recorded well. And I've worked in the digital media, worked with digital media, and one of the most difficult things it is to do is to actually create dynamics effectively. So when I talk about that, it's not meant as any kind of slight to composers in general, but it's actually a very difficult thing to do when it's not real, when it's not using real things. Now, I mean, it can be done. I've heard really great things, pieces of music and whatnot created that way that do use that effectively, but there is something about this and the total range of sound, range of dynamics, and the range of color of the instruments and whatnot. And especially since this combines so many different instruments from, as soloists from all over the, from around the world with very Western style orchestra as well. It's really something like around 406 when it's earlier. I think it's a little earlier than that when the trombones come in. You get the low brass, really kind of, not overpowering everything, but it's this color and this this weight, this depth that's at the bottom. That's really quite lovely. It's beautifully orchestrated.
Yes, it's a very special soundtrack, and a lot of these tracks really are phenomenal and really melodically driven, which is really nice too, mixed with some really nice rhythmic integrity in there as well. And these pieces are really good. So I couldn't let you leave without listening to at least something from Genshin Impact. So you did it. 15, 16
we really did
tracks.
that many? I guess we did a lot, didn't we?
This recording is nearing 4 hours, but it will be slightly trimmed down for various reasons. Now you've probably had like a total of 50 or so songs. I mean, this is quite the training course in video game music. I mean, has your perspective sort of changed even from the last time that we met? Have you sort of percolated on things more, or even it's okay if not?
Well, I had no perspective earlier because I've never listened to anything that was specifically video game music, at least not that I knew of. I still don't 100% hear the difference between video game music and anything else when listening out of context. I mean, because what makes video game music is the context. However, its intention was to be something used for video games. I mean, that seems like it might contradict something I said a little bit earlier. At the same time, as I said before, music is music. As you said also a few minutes ago, I think I said it last time, music is music. It is interesting to experience, all of these different sort of things. Similarly to film music, video game music seems to have a variety of different languages. It makes use of a variety of different genres. If you believe in such things. But I mean, the fact that we, the difference between Genshin and Guilty Gear, and also what was the Wagnerian thing? And the piece from Bloodborne. I mean, there are three completely different kinds of things, and they all might have evolved from the Legend of Zelda, that we listened to at the beginning of this epic session. But they sort of come from there for the actual, when you consider the actual purpose of the music and what it's supposed to do. But all of these can be listened outside of context, and they could be listened through your phone, they can be listened to with live orchestra, they can be, all of those. And they may not mean exactly the same thing unless you've experienced the game music itself. But, I mean, I've never avoided anything because it was video game music. I just can't listen to everything all the time. So that's why I'm so grateful for these sessions that you've invited me to, Marco, is that it exposes me to some stuff I haven't heard before. And
if you'd like Gregory to come back, we are planning, ideally, at some point in the future, to have him and Garth, the British man that you've seen, together. And
Garth is going to watch this, and he's just going to refuse now because I just did that.
He's going to be like, absolutely not.
You're not going to have me with
back to your fighting.
Everybody needs to know that Garth is one of my very, very closest friends. I love him to death. We've collaborated on many pieces of music together as well. It would be great if we could do a session together.
Yeah. He's amazing. He's amazing. And thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching this. Thanks for hanging in for the long haul. We hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.